Welcome to Spooky Times with Eric D. I am your long-absent host, Eric D. I'm sorry for the delay. It was really quite a long break between episodes this time. But hey, I'm back now, and I'm here, and I'm ready to talk with you about werewolves. But not the kind you hear about in Hollywood movies. We're going to be talking about some alleged, historical, real-life werewolves. Now, I'm going to leave off... some of the stories are pretty well known, but I'm going to leave off, ones that we've already talked about, or some of the big cases you hear about all the time. I wanted to dig just a little bit deeper. These aren't obscure by any means, but, it's not, the redheaded French kid and, that kind of thing. So we're going to dive into these real wolfmen. But before we do, of course, I want to remind you to check out the show's webpage. That is Spooky Times with Eric D. No, it's not. See, it's been too long. I forgot what everything is. That is spookyas.com. There you can listen to almost each and every episode of this very podcast, and you can also sometimes find pictures from episodes, and you can find links to all of our social media. I am at Spooky Times with Eric D on Instagram, and you can find us on Facebook at facebook.com/spookytimes with Eric D. While you're there, you can also join our secret closed group, the Spookaroos, and of course, you can join the Patreon, although why would you when I just took 2-3 months off? No, but seriously, the show is changing. I'm going to talk more about that at the end of the show so I can get right into the meat and potatoes of the show for you. But if you want to hear what took so long and what might be happening with the show in the future, go ahead and listen to the end. But I will just say this before we move on. I told you before, and I'll say it again, I will never ever end the show without saying a proper goodbye. Unless, I die unexpectedly or something. Then that's not my fault. Well, it probably is my fault, but I can't do anything about it. But yes, I would never leave the show completely, no matter how long a break I take. I would never leave the show completely without finding a way to say thank you and goodbye. So this is not thank you and goodbye. It was not thank you and goodbye on the last episode. It's not it on this episode. So let's proceed with what we came here to do, and that is talk about wolfmen. And of course, I pulled up the wrong notes. When things go wrong, they go wrong, my friends. All right, that's for a different episode. I'm working on 2 episodes at the same time for you. Okay, we are going to talk about werewolves, and now part of the problem is I'm doing this episode alone, obviously, and I don't have any guests here to tell me how to pronounce things. So we're going to be talking about all foreign werewolves. Foreign to me. As you might know, I live in Massachusetts in the United States, and so look, some of these names I am going to mispronounce. I heard recently that in Spain, if there's a word that's written from another language, they just say it however they would say it in their own language, So maybe I'll just do that. This is how, a guy from Massachusetts would say this word when he saw it written out, and that's how I'll say it. Okay, but actually I do know the first one. The Werewolf of Ansbach. This is a German tale from 1685, and I will say, the 1600s was a hot time for werewolves. The citizens of the township of Ansbach began to complain that something had been savagely attacking and devouring their livestock. Eventually, suspicion fell on a wolf that had been seen roaming the forest on the outskirts of town. This wolf was always seen alone, which is strange for an animal known to live and hunt in packs. It was said to be unusually unafraid of humans. At first, the villagers considered this just a weird lone wolf, just a nuisance, a thing to be avoided and protected against. But then it began attacking their children. The superstitious farmers of Ansbach eventually came to a frightening conclusion. Due to the boldness and bloodthirsty nature of this particular wolf, they believed it had to be more than a wolf. They decided that it was, in fact, a werewolf. But who could this werewolf be? Well, when we think of werewolves today, most of us think we know the rules. You become a werewolf by being bitten by a werewolf, you turn into a wolf every full moon, and you turn back into your human form by sunrise, and of course you can only be killed by being shot by a silver bullet, or at least being stabbed or bludgeoned by something made with pure silver. But most of that mythology comes out of the 1941 film classic The Wolfman from Universal Pictures. And that movie hadn't come out yet in 1685. So the Ansbach werewolf, and the other werewolves we'll be discussing tonight, don't play by our modern lycanthrope rules. The Ansbach werewolf was not thought to be a living person. Instead, it was believed that it was a kind of demonic reincarnation of someone who had lived a very wicked life. But who in town had died recently and lived a life so wicked that they would return from hell to torment the living in the form of a brutish wolf? The citizens all agreed. It was their recently deceased mayor. There are, as far as I know, no records that exist to explain why the farmers thought their deceased mayor was so evil, but everyone in town seemed to agree that the werewolf had to be he. It was decided that some of the men from town would organize a werewolf hunt to destroy the beast once and for all. Eventually, the hunters were able to chase the wolf out of hiding, and it ran through the streets of town with the hunters' dogs hot on its heels. Panicked, the wolf jumped into an uncovered well, apparently hoping it would offer some kind of escape or protection. It didn't. The wolf was killed, and the citizens of Ansbach rejoiced. And how? The wolf's body was removed, and the farmers decided to get a little more revenge on Mr. Mayor. They cut off the wolf's snout, dressed it in men's clothing, put a mask on its newly snoutless face, and a wig on its head, so that it would somewhat resemble the former Burgermeister. They paraded the body through the streets of town, and both as a warning and a celebration, the costumed corpse was hung from a gibbet on the edge of town. Eventually, it was taken down, so it could be preserved and displayed in a museum. No word on whatever actually happened to the preserved wolf body. Our next story takes us to Livonia, which is a country that doesn't quite exist, not the way it used to anyway. It's now known as Latvia. In 1692, a court session was being held in the country we know today as Latvia. It seems the local bank had been robbed, and the suspect and some witnesses were all called into court. One of the witnesses was a man named Theus. As he stood before the court, old Theus announced that he had a confession to make. The court reminded him that he was not the one on trial, he was just there as a witness, but Theus insisted on having his day in court, and so the judge allowed him to continue. Theus announced that although he was a normal elderly man now, in his younger days he had, in fact, been a werewolf. But, he explained, he was never a vile, bloodthirsty man-killer. He was a heroic werewolf who served a purpose higher than his own. Werewolves, according to Theus, were actually servants of God and had a very important role to play in God's plans for mankind. Theus explained that he had turned into a werewolf many years before, when he was a beggar. A man offered to buy poor Theus a drink. Theus eagerly accepted the stranger's offer, and the two went into a local tavern, where the stranger ordered 2 pints of ale and insisted on making a toast before he allowed Theus to take a sip. The exact wording is not recorded, but Theus says that the stranger spoke a charm that would, unbeknownst to Theus, turn him into a werewolf once he drank his pint. He did not go on to explain what happened the first time he transformed into a wolf, but he did give details into his life as a werewolf in general. He said he was not the only werewolf in the country, and that he and his wolf brethren underwent the transformation into wolves on 3 separate unspecified nights per year. So, again, full moons, nothing to do with it. Just 3 nights during the year, they're going to turn into a wolf. They would raid local farms, killing animals and roasting them over an open fire, seasoning them with salt. Fortified by their meal, they would then travel across the sea, as he called it, to hell, where they would find and chase the devil and his cavorting witches. Once they had cornered the archfiend and his concubines, Theus and his fellow wolves would beat the devil with iron rods. With the devil subdued, the werewolves would take back all the grain and livestock stolen by the witches over the past year, and if the wolves failed to do so, that year's harvest would be poor. Though Theus claimed to have been a benevolent werewolf who acted in the best interest of the Christian community, the judges didn't know what to make of his wild story. At the very least, it was decided that Theus had just confessed to practicing folk magic, a much frowned upon, if not downright illegal act. The judge asked Theus if he had regularly attended church. Theus confessed that he did not, but not because of any lack of faith. He insisted that it was because he was too old to understand the new Lutheran doctrine. Not knowing what else to do with him, the judge had Theus whipped and permanently banished for, quote, misleading Christians. If only that was something people could get banned for today. I don't think we'd have a church left in the country. And I need to interrupt this episode, Spookaroos, to let you know that my neighbors are being very noisy right now, and I apologize if you can hear them. I'm going to cut this episode a little bit shorter than I meant to, but I do want to tell you one more story before I go. So, let me tell you all about Jacques Roulette. Picture it, France, 1598. One day, a group of hunters set out to the woods to, hunt. As they entered the forest, they noticed something lying on the trail some yards ahead. As they drew closer, the men realized that the thing blocking the trail was actually the partially devoured body of a teenaged boy. The blood-soaked limbs were still palpitating, and the hunter knew that it must be a fresh kill. One of the men in the party leaned against a nearby tree, and as he did so, he startled 2 wolves who had been hiding behind it. The wolves ran off down a path, and the hunter and his crew gave chase, figuring that these must be the creatures who attacked the boy. They lost sight of the wolves, but followed their tracks to a bend in the trail. As the men made their way around the bend, they came face to face with a tall, gaunt man with long, straggly hair and a long, unkempt beard. He was only partially dressed in raggedy pants. His hands dripped with blood. Unsure of what exactly had transpired, the men seized the stranger and dragged him into town. They presented him to the local magistrates, who asked the stranger his name. The strange wild man answered that his name was Jacques Roulet. Roulet said that he had been a vagabond who had traveled the countryside with his brothers, Jean and their cousin, Julien. Jacques confessed that his parents had given him to the devil when he was very young, and that they had given him a special ointment that allowed him to transform into a man-eating wolf whenever he pleased. He also said that he had regularly attended satanic masses. Jacques revealed that the 2 wolves seen fleeing from the crime scene were his relatives, Jean and Julien. He denied personally killing the boy in question, but he admitted that he had taken some of the boy's flesh, to nibble on. Although he denied attacking this particular boy, he readily confessed to having killed and devoured other children in towns all over the country. Jacques gave precise dates and times for his crimes, which were found to be matching exactly with records of children who had either gone missing or were believed to have been killed by natural wolves. The magistrates ruled that Jacques should die for his crimes. He received the death penalty for the crime of werewolfism, cannibalism, and murder. His companions had also been rounded up at their camp in the woods, but denied any knowledge of werewolves or any of other Jacques' claims, and the magistrates found that both men were of good character, and he released them. Soon thereafter, Jacques recanted his confession and appealed his conviction to Parliament. He claimed that his confession had been forced under duress and that he had been frightened by the villagers who apprehended him. With no real proof that Jacques had committed any murders, Parliament decided that he must be insane, and so he was committed to an insane asylum, where he lived out the rest of his days. And thus ends his story. Now, I think it's interesting that he was found guilty and sentenced to die, but that conviction was somewhat overturned on appeal. And I guess, they say basically he was treated the way anyone suspected of, dabbling in the black arts, whether it's witchcraft or werewolfism or whatever else it may be, was treated, where basically they were tortured until they confessed. And he was saying that's kind of what happened here, and it looks like maybe the justice system was a little bit more fair with him than they have been in other instances. So, I don't know, folks. I just like werewolves. They were always my favorite monster growing up. Probably the movie and cartoon Teen Wolf had a lot to do with that. But, Michael Jackson's Thriller video, I know it's debatable whether or not he actually turns into a werewolf in the opening moments of that video. He does look more like some kind of cat creature looking back, but at the time I said that's a werewolf. He's changing under moonlight. That's a werewolf. So that was a big deal when I was a kid, and I think werewolves are cool, and I like talking about werewolves. I love movies about werewolves, although I do think we are missing, great movies about werewolves. I love American Werewolf in London. I think that's the closest we've come. I know a lot of people out there have other movies that they like. The Howling, Ginger Snaps is a more recent one that I've heard, and it's not that recent now, but compared to the other two, that I've heard a lot about. If you know a good werewolf movie that I need to check out, please let me know. And of course the Wolfman, right? Universal. You can't go wrong with the Universal monster movies. I know they're a little old-fashioned now, but they're such classics, and if you're like me, you grew up watching them. For me particularly, it was on the Moonlight Matinee on the Sci-Fi Channel. When that first came on, they used to do that. They used to show the old Universal monster movies, and I remember one of the first ones that I ever saw was Frankenstein Meets the Wolfman, which is just a great, fun movie with a great title, Frankenstein Meets the Wolfman. And as they pointed out, I think it was on Gilbert Gottfried's podcast, I like that it's not even promising a fight. It's just saying, they're going to meet. They're going to meet and we'll see what happens. Definitely check that one out if you have not. It is batshit crazy in all the best ways. But top of the line, what's the best werewolf movie in my opinion? You can't beat American Werewolf in London, even though I'm not particularly satisfied with how the wolf looks in that movie, even though it was done by Rick Baker, who of course is a genius and who also did the makeup for Thriller, so maybe it's not coincidental that I have some issues with the werewolf / werecat monster in the Thriller video, and I also have some with the appearance of the wolf in American Werewolf in London. Alright folks, I told you I would give you a little bit of information. The reason the show has been so delayed, there's not really like a good solid reason, aside from the fact that I think I'm kind of winding down here, to be honest with you. I think we are getting into the home stretch of the series as it stands now, he says intriguingly. Does that mean there's a change coming? There's going to be something different going on in the future? Yes, most likely that is true. This is not the final show of the regular series, but it could be one of the last ones. Like I said earlier, I will give you an official goodbye when I make that official decision. But for now, sit tight. If you're on Patreon, I'm going to tell you everything. I'm going to explain the possible future of the show, and you'll have all the information because I owe you people an explanation the most. There's only between 7 and 9 of you, depending on the day. And I can't thank you enough, especially if you've stayed with me through this time. I can't thank you enough. It was not my intention to take a long break here, but that's just kind of what happened. I think, and again, I'll be talking more about that on the Patreon. And if you don't join the Patreon, look, I totally understand, but if you do, You are, of course, going to be thanked in all the Witchfinder videos. There will be more coming out shortly. I'm doing a whole lot of research on Tituba. The Witchfinder's next video will be about Tituba. And of course, the Witchfinder and Spooky Times with Eric D all go together because they're all created and run by only one single person, and that is me. So, Spooky Times with Eric D is a Witchfinder production, and the Witchfinder is a Spooky Times production, I guess you could say. It's all me. It's all Eric D. So that's the scoop on that. If you want to learn more details, you can join the Patreon. But other than that, that's all I have to say for today. Thanks to my neighbors who are still out there arguing about child custody. So that's been fun to overhear as I sit here trying to not talk too loudly about bloodthirsty werewolves. Until next time, don't be afraid.